Some legends are born to shine. Others are born to fight the dark that comes with the light. Prince did both, and it killed him in slow motion. Before the industry tried to bury his truth, it first tried to bottle it, price tag it, and sell it back to the world as something safe. A genius trimmed down to a brand. A black man turned into purple merchandise. But beneath the sequins, beneath the lace and the eyeliner, Prince was waging a quiet war. Not just for his career, but for his name, his body, and his soul. 5 dark truths about Prince the industry tried to bury forever is not about gossip. It's about the things the machine hoped you'd never ask. Picture this, a young Prince in a boardroom, not on a stage. No guitar, no spotlight, just contracts on a table and executives in suits who saw him as a product line. He is barely out of his teens, yet he demands full creative control, writes and produces his own music, and insists on ownership of his masters. In a white-controlled system where black artists were supposed to be grateful just to be allowed inside the building, that demand was not just bold, it was dangerous. From that moment, he was marked as difficult, too independent, too free. You have to understand what that meant in the late 1970s and 80s. For a black man to walk into a major label and say, "I will decide who I am," was to violate an unwritten law. The first dark truth is this: the industry does not hate black genius. It hates black control. They will platform the sound, the swagger, the spectacle, but they want the ownership. They want the papers. They want the masters in a vault with their name on the door, not his. So they smiled. They shook his hand. They cut the deal. And then the slow tightening began. Prince the public sees is everywhere. Or MTV rotations, sold-out arenas, tabloid whispers about his lovers and his wardrobe. But Prince, the man, feels the walls closing in. The more hits he delivers, the more the label expects to own his future output like a factory. When he turns in experimental music, they call it uncommercial. When he withholds, they call it sabotage. When he fights back, they call it crazy. Ask yourself this: how do you gaslight a genius? Simple. You sign him, praise him, feed his fame, and slowly convince the world that his rebellion is madness, not self-defense. And yet, he keeps pushing. On stage, he blurs gender lines, mixes gospel with funk, eroticism with spirituality. Every performance becomes a sermon against confinement. To the crowd, it looks like pure spectacle. To the label, it looks like a problem that needs managing. You watch the videos now and clap, but imagine how threatening it felt in that era. A black man playing with androgyny, demanding God and sex in the same breath, refusing to make himself legible to the white gaze. The second dark truth emerges here. The industry will celebrate your surface while erasing your intention. They will sell the image of Prince as the sexy alien, the eccentric, the mystery, while quietly ignoring what he was actually doing, dismantling rigid boxes around black masculinity, black spirituality, black ownership. What you were told was weirdness was, in reality, resistance. Look closely at the footage from his most iconic tours. Notice how often he turns his back to the crowd, communing with his band as if the real conversation is happening behind the curtain of sound. He knew the cameras were there. He knew every moment could be repackaged, reframed, edited into something that fit the system's story. So he began building his own mythology. Paisley Park as a fortress, the vault as an ark, the symbol as a weapon. You might think of Prince as a man obsessed with control, but that's only half the story. He was a man under siege trying to protect a flame the industry wanted to own. Every time you stream a hit, you hear the polished side of that battle. What you don't hear, what they tried to bury, is how much of his life was spent fighting not just for charts, but for the right to exist as a free black artist in a system designed to cage him. And this is only the beginning of the truths they hoped you'd never see. He stood at the center of a storm he did not create, yet one that rose every time he refused to bend. And by the early 1990s, the tension snapped into public view. The second dark truth began to unfold. The industry never forgave Prince for demanding ownership of his masters. It wasn't just a contract dispute, it was a cultural rebellion. A black artist insisting that what his work, his labor, his legacy would not be held hostage. When he wrote the word slave across his face, an act some dismissed as theatrics, he was naming a system that thrived on the extraction of black brilliance while denying its creators the fruit of their genius. It was not metaphor, it was testimony. You might imagine executives shuffling in boardrooms, whispering about how to manage him, how to soften the blowback of a superstar, revealing the mechanics behind the curtain, dramatic reconstruction. Their concern wasn't his well-being, it was the fear of what might happen if others followed him. What if more artists learned the contracts they signed were cages? What if more black creators demanded the keys? Prince's protest threatened to unravel the quiet power structure that had governed the music world for decades. And so the punishments came, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Limited promotion, creative constraints, a public narrative painting him as unstable, erratic, difficult. This is the third dark truth. When the system cannot control a star, it controls the story around them. Prince became the villain in a tale written by the very people he challenged. They needed the world to believe he was spiraling, even when he was simply evolving. They needed you to think he'd lost his mind, so no one would follow his lead. But behind the scenes, he was sharpening himself, recording vaults of music, building a sanctuary of creation in Paisley Park, a temple forged from defiance, where he could compose without interference. Some visitors describe walking into a place that felt both divine and haunted, a world humming with the ghosts of the songs he never released. He created because he had to, not because the industry told him to, and that very independence scared them more than any public protest ever could. The fourth truth emerges here, quietly but unmistakably. Prince paid for his autonomy with isolation. The more he broke free, the more he was cast as an outsider. A man who lived in a house of music but rarely invited anyone past the gates. You might think fame protects someone from loneliness, but in Prince's case, it amplified it. Being misunderstood is one thing. Being misrepresented to millions is another. And yet, the deeper he sank into solitude, the more luminous his work became, as if the distance cleared space for something pure, something untouchable. But even that purity couldn't shield him from the final shadow creeping toward him, one that would ignite speculation, controversy, and decades of unanswered questions. The stage darkens now, and the last truth waits in silence. The fifth truth lingers like smoke. In the final years of Prince's life, the walls between myth and man grew dangerously thin, and the industry seemed strangely quiet. Too quiet for an artist whose brilliance had once commanded the world's pulse. Some say he became a ghost inside his own legend, moving through Paisley Park like a guardian watching over a kingdom no one else could truly understand. Others claim he sensed a tightening around him, an invisible pressure, the kind that follows an artist who knows too much and trusts too few. None of these accounts can be fully confirmed, but the whispers form a pattern the industry would rather you ignore. As Prince grew more independent, he also grew more vulnerable, disputed. You might imagine him walking the corridors late at night, fingertips brushing the walls, hearing melodies no one else could catch, dramatic reconstruction. He had spent decades fighting for ownership of name, sound, identity, legacy. But near the end, what he battled was larger than contracts. It was the weariness that settles into a soul forced to carry decades of brilliance while outrunning the machinery built to tame it. The same machinery that once tried to define him now tried to erase the complexities of his final years, shaping a narrative that felt too neat to be true. Some accounts suggest he was being watched closely, not by admirers, but by an industry waiting for a slip, a weakness, a moment they could recast as inevitability rather than consequence. When news of his health struggles circulated, the public heard fragments, canceled shows, sudden pain, an emergency landing. But the silence surrounding those events felt heavier than the information revealed. It was as if the world was encouraged to look away, to not question too deeply, to accept the official story without examining the cracks running beneath it. Disputed. And this leads to the darkest truth of all. After a lifetime spent demanding ownership, Prince did not get to own the narrative of his departure. Once he was gone, the industry he had fought for decades regained control, not of his masters, but of his mythology. They wrapped his memory in polished tributes, glowing headlines, sanitized reflections, beautiful on the surface but stripped of the rebellion, the wounds, the defiance that had defined him. It was the final attempt to bury the truths he carved into the world. That genius can be exploited, that identity can be threatened, that freedom must be defended even by those crowned as legends. Yet his legacy refuses burial. It rises, shimmering through generations that study his sound, his symbols, his insistence on sovereignty. And you, listening now, can feel it. The pulse beneath the purple haze, the echo of a man who would not surrender his name, even when the world tried to take everything else. Prince's story is not a tragedy. It is a testament, a reminder that some stars don't fade. They ignite revolutions long after the lights dim. Legends may fall, but their truth always rises.